Right. You know that feeling when someone asks you what you actually want, and you open your mouth, fully confident, absolutely certain you're about to say something, and then nothing comes out? Just this sort of low hum of vague intention and half-formed opinions that you borrowed from someone else about 10 years ago and never gave back. Yeah. That happened to me at 31. Someone asked me, at a dinner of all places, just casually over pasta, what I actually thought about a decision I had just made. And I started talking. And somewhere in the middle of talking, I realised I had absolutely no idea what I thought. I was just stringing together things I had heard other people say in a vaguely confident order, hoping nobody noticed. Nobody noticed. Which was almost worse. And the thing is, that was not a one-off. That was Tuesday. That was most weeks, if I'm being honest. I had opinions, obviously, loads of them, loud ones. But when I actually sat with any of them for more than 30 seconds, they had this slightly hollow quality, like they had been assembled from other people's leftovers. A bit of my dad, a bit of whoever had been most persuasive recently, a bit of whatever I had read on my phone at 11:30 the night before, while pretending I was about to go to sleep. I was not thinking for myself. I was curating thoughts that belonged to other people and presenting them as mine. Which, it turns out, is a surprisingly easy thing to do for a surprisingly long time before it catches up with you. I am John, by the way. Mid-40s, married, 2 boys who are currently at an age where they question everything and doubt nothing simultaneously, which is both exhausting and, honestly, quietly impressive. I do this because I keep noticing things. Things I wish someone had pointed out to me earlier. Not wisdom, exactly. More like evidence. The collected wreckage of my own slightly avoidable mistakes, presented here for your consideration. Think of it as a cautionary tour. And this specific topic, is one I feel quite strongly about. Not because I've got it all figured out, but because I spent so many years not having it figured out at all, and I can see very clearly now what that cost me. Here is the actual problem. Most of us are never quiet. Not properly. We wake up and the phone is already in our hand before we have fully arrived in the day. We commute with a podcast. We eat with the telly on. We fall asleep watching something that does not require us to think too hard. And somewhere in between all of that input, all that noise, all those other people's voices, our own thoughts barely get a word in. And that is a problem. Because a man who never sits with his own thoughts is incredibly easy to push off course. Someone with a strong opinion, a compelling argument, a charismatic delivery, and suddenly he is agreeing with something he would not have agreed with if he had had 5 minutes to actually think about it. He buys things he does not need, follows paths that do not suit him, ends up at 40 in a job he chose for reasons he cannot quite reconstruct, wondering quietly how he got there. I am not describing anyone in particular. The career thing is real though. I spent a long time doing things because they made sense on paper, or because someone I respected seemed to think they were a good idea. And I did not ask myself the obvious question, which was, does this suit me? Does this fit with what I actually want? Because to answer that question, you have to know what you actually want. And knowing what you actually want requires spending some time alone with yourself, thinking, without filling the silence with something else the moment it gets uncomfortable. Which, it turns out, is not easy. Nobody tells you that sitting quietly with your own thoughts is a skill. They make it sound like meditation retreats and scented candles, like you just sit down, close your eyes, and the universe gently hands you a 5-point plan for your life. In reality, the first time I actually tried to just sit and think, with no phone, no podcast, no television, I lasted about 4 minutes before I was up checking whether we needed more bin liners. It is uncomfortable. Your brain, without something to latch onto, tends to serve up the stuff you have been avoiding, the things you should probably do something about, the conversation you have been putting off, the feeling you have been successfully burying under a podcast about true crime for the better part of 6 months. It is not peaceful. It is more like sitting in a waiting room you did not realize you had been avoiding for years. But here is what I eventually figured out. The discomfort is the point. Not in a punishing way, just that resistance is the thing trying to tell you something. And if you never sit still long enough to hear it, you spend years getting vague signals from your own life that something is off, without ever knowing what. Your inner voice, when you actually start listening to it, is a strange thing. It is not always helpful to begin with. Mine, when I first started paying attention, was largely a rolling commentary of criticism. Very dry, very British. Mainly just pointing out everything I had not done, should have done, probably should not have said in 2007. It was less a wise inner guide, and more a disappointed middle manager who had been following me around for decades. But over time, and this took a while, I started to notice the difference between the voice that was bullying me and the voice that was actually trying to help. The bully is loud and vague. It just says you are not good enough in a slightly different way on a loop. The helpful one is quieter and more specific. It says things like, "That decision does not feel right," or "You keep coming back to this for a reason." Learning to tell the difference is worth every uncomfortable minute of sitting with yourself. And the strange part is, the practical things that actually help are completely ordinary. They are almost boring to say out loud. But they worked for me, so here they are. Walking. Proper walking, not commuting walking, not walking fast to a destination, just walking somewhere with no agenda and no earphones. I started doing this on weekday mornings when I could manage it, about 20 minutes round the block, sometimes longer at the weekend. Nothing dramatic, just movement and quiet. And something about the rhythm of it, the physical monotony, seems to free up something in the brain. The thoughts that could not get through all week start surfacing. You notice what is bothering you. You notice what you have been looking forward to. You start to hear yourself. Writing. I know, I brought the journal up once already, and we all know how that ended. But there is something different about just writing. Not journaling in the aspirational ribbon bookmark sense, but just sitting down occasionally and getting whatever is in your head onto paper. No structure, no format, just a brain dump. 3 pages or 3 sentences does not matter. Something about making the thought physical, making it external, helps you see it more clearly. You look at it and you think, oh, is that what I actually think? Sometimes yes. Sometimes you look at what you wrote and realise it is complete nonsense and you feel instantly better. Quiet time. Not necessarily meditation, though if that works for you, brilliant. Just time where you are not consuming something. Sitting in the garden with a cup of tea that goes cold because you forgot to drink it. Staring out of a window on a train. The moments we usually fill with our phones because silence feels slightly unnerving. Letting those moments just be silence. This sounds very small, and it is very small, and it genuinely helps. The thing these 3 things have in common is that they give your own thoughts enough space to actually arrive. That is all. You are not doing anything special. You are just not drowning them out for long enough to hear them. And the reason this matters, the actual reason, is self-awareness. Which I know sounds like a therapy word, but I mean something very practical by it. I mean knowing yourself well enough that you do not spend years drifting. Knowing what you actually value, so that when a decision comes along, you make it from a real place, rather than assembling whatever feels convenient in the moment. Knowing when you are tired versus when something is wrong. Knowing the difference between a bad week and a bad direction. I had a long stretch in my mid-30s where I was fine on paper and quietly restless underneath it. Good job, decent life, nothing obviously wrong, just this low hum of feeling slightly off course. And I could not work out what it was, because I was never still long enough to sit with it. Every time the feeling surfaced, I buried it under something. A project, a purchase, a plan. And the feeling just stayed there, waiting. The day it actually clicked for me, genuinely clicked. I was on a walk, a stupid, ordinary Wednesday walk round a park near work, eating a sandwich because I'd forgotten to sit down for lunch and felt vaguely guilty about it. And I had no podcast on for once, just by accident. And I found myself actually thinking. Not planning, not worrying, just thinking. And something came up that I had been pushing down for about 2 years. And I sat on a bench in the drizzle, which is very on brand for this country. And I just let it be there for a minute. And it was uncomfortable. And it was also, strangely, a relief. That is what I want for my boys. Not enlightenment, not a rigid self-improvement schedule, not a journal with a ribbon bookmark that they abandon in 3 weeks. Just the ability to sit with themselves, to know their own minds, to not be so unfamiliar with their own thoughts that the first person who sounds confident is able to hand them an opinion and have them walk away wearing it like it was theirs all along. I want them to know when something feels right and when something feels off. I want them to make decisions from a real place. I want them to be the kind of people who, when someone asks them what they actually think, can open their mouths and say something that genuinely belongs to them. Because the alternative is what I was doing at 31 over that pasta. Just talking confidently in the approximate direction of an answer, hoping no one looked too closely. And nobody did look closely that evening. But I knew. And knowing that you do not know your own mind is a strange and slightly unsettling thing to carry around. The good news is it is not permanent. It just takes some practice, some inconvenient walks, some cold cups of tea, some pages of writing that look a bit unhinged in the morning but helped you feel better for writing them. It takes choosing, occasionally, to let it be quiet, instead of filling the silence the moment it gets uncomfortable, which, if you are anything like me, will take some getting used to. But it is worth it. Genuinely worth it.